One of the greatest warriors that India had ever known, Drona, aspired to have a son to exceed himself, a son who would be greater than his father had ever been, which would be a massive achievement. And so he, after much thought, didn't entirely give up the life of a warrior, but favoured instead the life of a mystic, of an ascetic. He took himself off to the woods. He spent phenomenal periods of time praying, fasting, meditating, contemplating the nature of life and the universe, awakening his chakras, attaining a state of spiritual transcendence, devoting himself to the gods. And at length the gods rewarded him with the son that he aspired to. And his wife became pregnant with a child that they would eventually call Ashwathama. And Ashwathama was all that his father could have desired, all that his mother could have desired in a child. And still Drona maintained the life of a mystic, but there are many things that being a mystic brings you, like amazing children. One of the things it doesn't tend to bring you is money with which to pay the rent, with which to put food on the table. And so Drona sought the aid of someone he had known when he was young, someone he had studied alongside, grown up with, someone who was now a king in his own right. He went and spoke to Drupada and said, "Do you remember the good old days when we were young together, and here am I, here is my child, my wife," and so on. And Drupada sat there upon his throne of gold and rubies and diamonds, with the most exquisite clothing and great emeralds and stones set all about him. And he looked at this half-starved, scrawny ascetic, dressed in well, little more than rags, really, and his wife and his child likewise. And he said, "Whatever we may once have been, we are no longer. I am, look at me, I am regal, I am plump with the goodness of life. I am all the things that you are not, and you are this smelly, wretched beggar who comes off the streets. Go away, go away." And he turned his back on their friendship. He cast Drona and his wife and his child out back onto the streets from when they'd come. And Drona, well, he sought the solace and the advice of the gods, and the gods told him he should travel. He should travel to the land of Kurukshetra, and there he should become a sage and an advisor, a spiritual counsel to the two great royal families of the area, to the Pandava brothers and to the Kauravas as well. And that is exactly what he did. He went and he became this figure of wisdom, of renown, of insight and understanding. But even as he was dispensing wisdom to these royal families, his wife well cared for, his child well cared for, learning the arts of war, just as his father had once learnt the arts of war, skill with every conceivable weapon. As all of these good things were taking place, so dissent was bubbling within that region, within Kurukshetra. The two great royal families, the Pandava brothers and the Kauravas, were gradually turning against one another, were fomenting hatred and resentment of one another, and that over the months and the years bubbled and festered and boiled like a cauldron of poison, until at length war burst out across the land. Bloodthirsty, terrible, deadly warfare. Well, Drona found himself, like everybody else, caught up in this warfare. Day after day it raged on, and he, using all of his great skills to fight for the cause. And at length Krishna himself, the mighty god, went and spoke to the Pandava brothers, the five of them, and said, "You will never be able to defeat Drona. He is the greatest, the most phenomenal warrior India has ever known. There is nothing you can do to stand against him, unless you pay heed to this plan." And he laid out his plan before the Pandava brothers, who listened and saw that it was a great and a wise plan. They called for one of their own warriors, for Bhima, who was a huge, great, burly man with a massive beard and moustache, who had the strength, it is said, of 1,000 elephants, and he came along and he did his part in the plan. The Pandavas found an elephant, and they named this elephant even, Ashwathama, named it after the son of Drona. And Bhima took his sword and he beheaded the elephant. The poor beast lay there dead, its blood gouting out into the soil, feeding the land. Its only crime being that it had the misfortune to fall into the schemes and the plots of these royal families. And messengers were sent to Drona to say, your son Ashwathama is dead. And Drona looked into the eyes of the messenger and said, repeat the message. And the messenger said, Ashwathama is dead. And Drona, being a wise man, a sage, a counsellor, one who had attained great spiritual enlightenment, could see that the messenger was speaking the absolute truth. Ashwathama was dead. Of this there can be no doubt. And this is an example of how the truth can still deceive. For Drona's heart was broken to think his beloved son was dead. And he began the process of grieving and mourning. People were sent out to find the body of Ashwathama, and whilst he was awaiting the body, the old father, he sat there meditating and contemplating, all of his weapons put far away from him, performing the necessary death rites. And it was whilst he was in this serene state of grief, his mind off on other dimensions of existence, that his killer, Drapada, crept up and cut the old man's head clean off his shoulders as he sat meditating, as he sat contemplating. The only time, as Krishna had advised the brothers, the Pandavas, the only time that Drona would be vulnerable was in this act of meditation, this act of deep-rooted grief. And so, having tricked him into grieving, they killed him. Well, word got out, and Ashwathama, that is to say, the real Ashwathama, not that poor elephant, heard that his father had been murdered, and he flew into a rage, for he knew it had been done by trickery, by deception, by dishonesty, by dishonourable means. He flew into the most enormous rage, and he turned to the gods themselves. And it must be remembered that Ashwathama was one of the 7 Chiranjeevi, one of the 7 immortal beings who live upon the earth during this age of Kali Durga and guard humanity. Protect it, steer it, direct it to where it must go. And what a burdensome job that must be, given how ridiculous the human race is at times, then as now. So he was no ordinary man. He was an immortal being, possessed of tremendous powers, able to achieve things that no mere mortal man could achieve. And so when he turned to the gods themselves, he sought through contemplation and meditation and spiritual attainment to grasp one of the great weapons of the gods themselves. He grasped the Naryanastra. And what is the Naryanastra? No one entirely knows, for we are but mortals. But this weapon of the gods came down from the heavens like a shower of meteorites, falling upon the armies of the Pandava brothers. Great spheres of light falling and falling and falling, thousands upon thousands of them, falling out of the sky, crashing into the armies, killing tens of thousands of warriors, threatening the lives of the great generals, of the princes and the kings themselves. And it was shouted out by those who understood the nature of the weapon before them, that the warriors of the Pandava brothers should dismount from their elephants, from their horses, from their various steeds, and lay their weapons, their swords, their spears, their axes, their bows, their arrows, lay them upon the earth and hold their hands up to show that they were unarmed. For the nature of the Naryanastra weapon is that it kills only those who are armed. It does not kill civilians, it does not kill children, it does not kill farmers, it kills only those who stand heavily armed, well, not even heavily, just armed with weapons of some kind to fight. It's like a heat-seeking missile that comes down from the sky and targets only those who are combatants. And many of the warriors of the Pandava brothers did exactly as they were told. They jumped down from their elephants, they jumped down from their horses, they lay their swords and their spears and their bows and arrows and so forth upon the ground and held up their hands to the sky and said, "We are unarmed." And the weapons that were coming down, these meteorites of a bright burning light, left them untouched and struck only those brother warriors who were too slow to drop their weapons or hadn't heard the cry, or indeed, like Bhima himself, that great bold mighty warrior, were too proud to lay down their weapons. So many died that day, but not all. Not the man who had been responsible, not Drupada who had been responsible for beheading Ashwathama's father, nor any of the 5 Pandava brothers who were objects of contempt and hate in the heart of Ashwathama, inasmuch as so mystical a man can hate anyone. And one of his dearest advisors turned to Ashwathama and said, "Call back the weapon, call back the Naryanastra, and launch it again, make a second strike." And Ashwathama had to explain that this was simply not possible, for if it was recalled to source, the Naryanastra would destroy the person to whom it was recalled. For like, as in many cultures, for example, up in Nepal, when they draw a blade from its sheath, it must be fed, it must taste blood. So even if they do not draw in anger, they draw only to show their weapon, they must cut themselves to give it a taste of blood. So some weapons cannot be wielded in anything other than an intent to kill. They must drink of blood, of life. And the Naryanastra was too dangerous to call back. It could not be used a second time. And so Ashwathama thought and thought and thought as to what he would do. And that night, in the hours of darkness, whilst the surviving warriors and generals and princes and kings of the Pandava brothers slept, Ashwathama went to earth with all the skills of his father inherited, all those skills with weapons, with swords and spears and axes, and he walked amongst the sleeping warriors of the Pandavas, silently and stealthily, like a tiger creeping through the jungle, until he came upon Drupada, the man who had beheaded his own father. And he kicked him heavily in the side, and the man, startled, awake to what's going on. And unarmed with any weapon but his own bare hands, for he had laid all of his weapons aside, Ashwathama strangled Drupada to death. And even as he choked and he begged, let him be armed, let him hold a sword or a spear or a dagger or something that he might be able to say, and his children be able to say he had died a warrior's death, died armed, Ashwathama would not let him have that dignity, for he had not let Drona have that dignity of dying a warrior's death. He had snuck up on him and beheaded him without a chance to defend himself. And so Ashwathama gave the dishonourable death by strangling to this deceitful and dishonest Drupada. who at length lay there dead, his windpipe crushed in the great warrior's own bare hands. And the battle raged on, but the rest of the battle is another story, and this is the end of this one. Thank you.